The Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper. And now, Coach Bill Clark.
Welcome into the Bill Clark Show. Pat Smith, Lance Roberts, Molly Robinson, along with Coach Bill Clark. This is episode 12. Another just incredible weekend, Coach, of college football. We'll have the college football playoff rankings we can talk about a little bit later. A full slate today on the show, brought to you by Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, appreciate our guys at Dr. Pepper, obviously Buffalo Rock, what they do to put our show on and obviously promote college football every week.
All right, let's start with the on the plains of Auburn. The Auburn Tigers, after beating Kentucky, everyone thought, okay, this is going to propel them, springboard the rest of the season. Unfortunately, a very good Vanderbilt team comes in and keeps them only at 7 points, and they get the 10-point win.
Yeah, I mean, first, you got to give Vanderbilt credit. I know we were talking about that Monday. I think somebody reached out and said, you know, what about Vanderbilt? What have they done? So let's give them credit, obviously, what they've done offensively, the big changes. We've talked to them about the quarterback. The thing that I noticed, and I think something that stood out to me early, was if you looked at what Vandy was doing to Auburn, their defense against Auburn's offense, they loaded that box, you know, bare front and said, you're not going to run the ball. Now, you've got to be ready to handle that. You still got to be able to run the ball, getting 12 personnel. We've talked about getting the extra tight end, maybe an extra lineman in there, finding ways to run the ball. But they took Hunter away. And then it came down to throwing the ball, and you know they just didn't get it done. So give Vandy credit; they've got a really good team right now. They're doing a lot of good things, but Auburn has got to be able to still run the ball.
You look at this Auburn team, Coach, DJ Durkin, this defense, they've gotten better. You've seen individual young players developing through the course of the season. And I think Auburn right now around 21, 22 in defense in the country and what they're able to do. The offensive side of the ball, I wouldn't even say stagnant. I would say regression, and that's what we saw this past week.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about later in the show about their defense. I think their defense is playing well. I think two things. I think offensively, they're not getting enough explosive plays, obviously, and they're not getting the ball. We've talked about to the running back enough. You've got to make sure he's got his touches, and then he rushes for almost 275. They're going to make adjustments. You've got to be ready for that. Quarterback play is not terrible. It's just there was throws at the end that he had a chance to make that he did not make, and then missed 2 field goals. You know, a crazy penalty at the end of the game. That's what's happening to them. Those difference-making plays, they're not making them. Their opponents are.
So the rest of the season, Coach, you're looking at a team now. They're going to have to win the rest of their games to be bowl eligible. I know you got to take it one game at a time. They got a very difficult opponent, someone that you know very well, Louisiana Monroe, who's already knocked off, obviously, UAB. Now they're coming down to the Plains. Just talk about the mindset of this Auburn football team right now with their backs really against the wall for the season.
You know, I was talking to Coach Vincent from Monroe. He said he's played 4 teams with an open date before him. So,
oh, wow.
You know, not in his favor there, but they've got, you know, obviously they're going to be favored in that game, even with Monroe's really good record this year, and we'll see what they do this weekend. So they're going to be favored. Texas A&M and Alabama back-to-back. It's going to be tough. I mean, so we'll see what they do. They are good enough to be in all those games, obviously, and we know about the parity in the league, but they found ways not to win. So, you know, you would think hopefully they're getting healed up for a chance for that stretch run.
I just go back to lack of imagination, it appears to me, on the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned Jarquez Hunter, the 23 carries he had in Lexington against Kentucky for 278 yards. I realize they took things away, but to your point, Coach, you got to be prepared for that. You got to have some kind of counter and get creative with finding ways to get him the ball in different situations, and I'm not seeing that from Auburn.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest problem, you know, that I've talked about. I think they've done a lot of things. I don't think they're getting enough explosive plays. But when you've got a guy that rushes for 275 and you're going to feature him, you've got to find ways, imaginative ways, to your point, to get him the ball even when people know he's going to get it.
All right, the UAB Blazers, Coach, they get a big win. It was Children's Harbor game, very close and dear to all of our hearts down at Protective Stadium. Impressive. I mean, UAB came out, set the tone early, got a big lead, big win, big day, homecoming against Tulsa.
Yeah, a few things. UAB had the open date, which I think at this time of the year, and that's, once again, I'm not taking anything away from them. I think they used it well to get the open date, to rest up, to have a good plan, to execute on the plan. You know, obviously I don't think they're playing a great opponent, but they needed the win, but it was a dominant win. That's what they needed. I think a big deal, and I've heard this from multiple people involved with Children's Harbor, talked to some of the coaches. I think those guys really played for those names on the back that we've been talking about. The Children's Harbor Patients. Children, such a great day. They were taken care of. The families were so happy and had a great time. So really love that tradition we've got going. Appreciate UAB for keeping it going. Congrats to them for the big win. They got a good Connecticut team coming in this week.
You had, and just from my vantage point on the sideline, you had an amount of emotion with that team, and I've been with them and down there every single game. It was renewed. It was fresh. I think the off week, the bye week probably helped that, but also for this team, Coach, for everything to go your way.
Yeah.
Especially early, it was just what the doctor ordered.
Yeah, and I think that's what you look for when you're watching a team that's struggled. If something just does not go their way, does that throw them off? So when you have positives like that and you already got some good emotion, you're playing on, you're rested up, that's what they needed. And they were dominant. I mean, this tells you this team has talent. I think that's where a lot of the extreme disappointment has been, because it's not an untalented team. I mean, they've got size, they've got speed, they've got skill players, they've got a quarterback that can get the ball out. So, up to this point, it's not been what it should have been. But give them credit, really good game on Saturday.
Smart Bank brings us the smart call of the week. Let's go to Columbia, South Carolina, where, you know what? We thought Texas A&M was the best team in the SEC. Well, the Gamecocks had something to say about it, Coach. Just an impressive performance. And I know Texas A&M lost their number one running back for the season, a tough injury there in that ball game. But the electricity, sandstorm, everything going on, night game in Columbia, Gamecocks showed out.
Yeah, they did, and I think you've got they are like two different teams. Now, granted, they're very impressive to me when they played Alabama, but there's something there at when they play at their place. Sellers, the freshman quarterback, unbelievable, 240 yards pass, 44 yards passing, 106 yards rushing, 0 turnovers. He was the freshman of the week. Running back had a great. I guess that's Sellers, not Sanders. Sanders is a running back. Sanders, a running back, had 144 yards on 20 carries. The defense had 2 fourth-down stops, a big pick in the fourth down. But that front four for them, and always, come back to the defense. Even though we talked about those offensive guys, they can be dominant, especially when you talk about rushing the passer.
And you could tell when they came out of the tunnel and sandstorm and all the pregame stuff that they have. Williams-Brice was lit last Saturday night. But the intensity you saw from everybody, not just on the defensive side, but everybody was looking to punish a Texas A&M player, and we saw it for 60 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a start to finish game that they had, and Texas A&M was playing catch up. I had that question, we discussed last week. What would Texas A&M do with the quarterback situation? You'd had the other guy Legion, and all of a sudden you got the runner comes in, and so they went that route. So that was a question I had. Would you do that after you had the success running the ball against LSU at the end of the game?
All right, so I want to ask you about the SEC in general, just the chaos that we're seeing. Texas A&M, first loss of the season in SEC play. You have Georgia, played very lethargic, had some issues against a Florida team that was obviously right at 500, but Georgia got the win. But how do you kind of surmise what you're seeing in the SEC as we head down the home stretch?
I truly think it is a week-to-week proposition. I think it is injuries. I mean, it's very NFL-like. It is very NFL-like because there's so many of them. They're all pretty close. Injuries, playing at home. Did you have an open date the week before? I know that sounds like a cop-out, really, where we're not giving exact answers, but I think it's really coming down to those details. We know Georgia was lucky. They had 3 turnovers. Florida, if they don't get the second, their number 2 quarterback hurt, what happens? They're right there to the end. Once again, though, and this is what good teams do, Georgia finds a way to win it, in the end.
Yeah, but it's got to concern you if you're a Georgia fan and Carson Beck in some of these moments, whether it was in Alabama and having a key interception, and now the interceptions they're starting to mount. Eventually, that's going to get you beat in one of these close games, and one of those games could be this weekend in Oxford.
Well, I think a guy like him, in his defense, he had 2 great players last year, and I think what happens, sometimes you think you're maybe a little bit better than you are, or he's pressing now, but when you can throw it to Bowers and McConkey and they just go make plays, you don't have to press as much. He's trying to make plays. He forced some balls big time the other Saturday. So, this is going to be a big one coming up. We're going to talk about it later in the show against Ole Miss, but there was a lot of area for concern.
Smart Bank, Coach, an institution that you are very close to with those great people over there.
Yeah, I think the thing that I love about Smart Bank, and obviously I'm affiliated with those guys now and have been with the people for years. These were a lot of folks at Compass Bank, which was a great bank, moved over to Smart Bank, so we're getting that same small town feel, but you get all the big bank amenities. So love the guys at Smart Bank.
Webb Concrete and Building Materials, building blocks to victory. Big one down in Red Stick, Louisiana, or Baton Rouge, what the French called it. Alabama takes on LSU this weekend. Bama a slight favorite. Bama and LSU both having that off week. Big game, elimination game, Coach, for both teams.
Yeah, it's a playoff game. You got the night game, Death Valley. Crowd noise is always going to be a factor. I love having the fact both teams are off. What does that do? One, it gets them healthy, so we get the best of both teams. Also, you get the nuances. Remember, we talked about that with Alabama before, where they had the open date, came out with a lot more empty, a lot more quarterback run. Really got ahead. That ended up winning for them to get jumped out ahead of Georgia. So I think, and we're going to talk about the same thing with Ole Miss. You're looking at the other team's weaknesses. Now, we talked about Alabama really making a big point of emphasis on defense. Going to get tougher, going to get more discipline as a team. I think we saw that against Missouri. The problem with Missouri, obviously, their starting quarterback was out. So we don't know how much of that was him being out, how much of it was them. Do think they were better, obviously, last week. But I think you said it. Both teams they've got a lot to prove. The last thing I'm going to say is, here's Nussmeier against Alabama's secondary. Even though they played good against Missouri, statistically, I think last in the league in explosive plays given up.
Coach, I want to know how you handled this. We had the college football playoff rankings unveiled the other night. Mm-hmm. Alabama, they're in. If you're Kalen DeBoer, or let's just say now Coach Bill Clark, you're coaching Alabama, do you make mention of this to your team?
No, I think everything's about LSU. And we're playing for championships. We're here to play for that's a lot of off-season talk. Now it is this game in front of us is a championship game. It's a one-game season. We've got this open. To me, that is when it's fun. You're not looking to the week past for this open date. You can focus on them. Now, they're focusing on you as well, but that's what it's all about. There's our focus, because we know if we take care of ourselves the rest of the way out, we got an opportunity.
Langelo and I, we've talked to some people this week from Louisiana, and they've come on the show, and they've talked about how they're concerned about Jalen Milroe running the football, because they remember last year in Tuscaloosa when Jalen Milroe, he had a better game than Jaden Daniels running the football. That's why Alabama won. They're concerned that Jalen Milroe is going to show up. How important is that for Bama to get back to what they did against Georgia to get a win?
Yeah, 100%. I think the thing for him, and we talked about him tiptoeing, some of that is probably they've run him so much, maybe. The other thing, I think they were trying to do too much. Remember what we talked about? His reads should be half-field reads. It's 1, 2, take off. Not 5 reads across the board. That's when he holds the ball. Got to have quarterback runs built in there, especially when you need them. Just don't need to use them so much that he gets beat up. But this is a game. It's a 15 to 20 carry a game for him, must win. And he's rested up. So they're going to see it, and they didn't defend it well against Texas A&M. Now, we talked about that. Texas A&M's first quarterback was a thrower. That's where they spent their time, obviously. So it's going to be a little bit different when they're expecting it.
Alabama was really good coming off the first bye week when they took on Georgia, and we saw what they were able to do and some of those wrinkles that Kirby saw and that defense saw, especially in the first half. Alabama, if you can build on anything, you mentioned the running game and Jalen Milroe, but also with Haynes and Miller and what we saw in that 34-0 win over Missouri, especially late in that game, I would think that you would have to have a heavy dose. My question is, how much is the run-pass ratio on Saturday night?
Yeah, it needs to be balanced. It needs to be balanced. However that works out, you've got to run it enough to make it important, to set your throw game up, to set your play action, to be able to take advantage of those 3rd and shorts and 4th and shorts. You got to be able to run the ball, and it's a mentality as well. So I think all those things go into it. It's just one of those things that we got to take what they give us, but you still got to be able to run the ball.
And you look at what LSU's offensive line has done this year, Coach. They've given up 4 sacks on the year, but they haven't been able to run the ball.
Right.
They've been good in pass protection, but only averaging about 99 yards rushing per game. Talk about what Alabama's defense needs to do to kind of go up against Nussmeier and try to limit them and cut off that running game.
Yeah, I think you got 2 really good offensive tackles. We've talked about both those guys before. I think they're really good in pass pro. Other thing, they lost the running back, early in the season. I think that really hurt them. No, I think the freshman has played well. They're going to be in the same mindset. Can we get the run game going? Just, if nothing else, to set up our throw game. So Both teams have got to do that. I think both of them want to throw the ball first. You've got to run the ball, and you've got to run it enough to set the pass game up.
I want to stay on the offensive side of the ball. When you think back to the other big games and the talented teams that Alabama's played this season, whether it was Georgia at home, Tennessee on the road, we'll take those two teams, and then LSU. Just at the skill positions, though, where would you put this LSU team when comparing it to Georgia and also to that Tennessee squad?
I think offensively they may be better, skill-wise. I think, and you've got a quarterback that can really throw it. I think Alabama has seen talent, so that's not going to fool them. They've been loud. I mean, how loud can we be? We can make our jokes about nailing with the speakers everywhere, but it's going to be loud. But they've seen that. They've been in this environment. That's why it's exciting. Both teams have played in some really big games. They've had the open date. The lines are very close. It's going to come down to a play here or a play there and see who to win the game.
You want to talk about signs? If I'm LSU, I put a sign that said LSU Tiger Stadium, we don't need speakers.
There you go. Yeah, give them a challenge.
They don't need speakers.
Yeah,
no,
they
doubt.
don't. No. Night game. Wow. Brian Kelly is 13-0 night games at Tiger Stadium.
That's a good stat.
Just thought I'd just throw that out there.
Just info. Just give us the info.
Try to do what I can.
Yes, thank you.
Webb Concrete and Building Materials, they sponsor that segment each and every week.
Yeah, we got Webb Concrete. They do concrete. They do building supplies. They do flooring. They got Oxford Showroom, Oxford Ready Mix, Heflin, Roanoke Center, Homewood. Obviously, Pell City with Jacob, my son there, Lumber Floor. He does flooring. They do concrete. Obviously, we got I think I mentioned a Homewood and a Birmingham station location. So go check those guys out. They got what you need.
All right, so this week, the Alabama Power 5 of the week, we're going to kind of do a little bit different because not only we're going to talk about the Power 5, but also, Coach, we had the debut of the college football playoff. Just your treetop view of what we witnessed on Tuesday night in the rankings.
Yeah, I think the rankings are pretty close right now about what we think. I think with Indiana and BYU both being undefeated and getting to jump in there. BYU really, and I don't know if y'all knew that, but they've probably got some first place votes. Did y'all see that? Did y'all notice?
Last time
they
lost the game, it was in the Radiance Technologies Independence Bowl in Shreveport to a Bill Clark coach UAB team.
Yes, and you did. That was all coaching that game too. If we're just going to lay it on real thick, so
it was all coaching.
Yeah, sure.
He always brings up BYU.
It was textbook.
They are undefeated, Pat.
They still show that game at clinics across the country.
That's right. Yeah, sure they do. Yeah, I think it just does add excitement. I do think those teams were sitting out there kind of outliers with undefeated. Now they've worked their way in. So, I've still got Georgia at 2, Oregon at 1, Georgia 2, Ohio State. I was very impressed with them at Penn State, especially as the game went on. Miami is still sitting there. Obviously, strength of schedule is not what it should be, but they're going to be there. They're here right at the end. Texas, Penn State. Then we talked about we've got Tennessee 7, Indiana 8, BYU 9, Notre Dame 10. There's Alabama at 11, and Boise State has now come in at 12.
Oh, Boise State. Alabama Power, it's been an institution in Birmingham and, of course, the state of Alabama for over 100 years.
Yeah, and we always come back to, what Alabama Power does for our communities. So many projects that we were involved in at UAB, Alabama Power was always standing right there beside us. I also want to go back to the Children's Harbor game, another sponsor of those jerseys. We had Porch Creek Indians, we had Radiance Technology, we had Alabama Power. So appreciate the guys at Alabama Power and what they do.
Donahue Chevrolet's Drive for Success, the Ole Miss recipe, Coach, taking on the Georgia Bulldogs, an elimination game for Lane Kiffin and his Rebels.
Yeah, before we really get talking about each squad, I think just when you think about what they're known for, Ole Miss RPOs, that's something Kiffin has really prided himself on. And when it's on, as we saw last week against Arkansas, they're on. Now, who probably understands that as good or better than anybody is Kirby Smart. You've got a head coach so involved with the defense. He's really had some really good plans for Ole Miss through the years. So I do think it's a different Ole Miss team, but I think it's going to be Georgia's defense against Ole Miss offense and those RPOs. I think Ole Miss is going to go back and really look at that first half of that Alabama game and see what Alabama did, because you've got a quarterback now. He can't run quite like Milroe, but he is athletic and can run as well.
There's rain expected in Oxford, 80%, 91%, depending on which forecast you're looking at. I don't know how that affects or who it affects more. Would it be Ole Miss in throwing the ball? I know quarterbacks have said a wet football. They'd rather throw a wet football than have wind. What does that do to Carson Beck? But for me, Coach, it's Pete Golding and the defensive side of the ball. And the amount of sacks that this Ole Miss defense has been able to tally so far this season, they're one of the best at doing it. If you were ever going to do it, you have got to make Carson Beck uncomfortable.
Yeah, I do think the fun matchup is what we talked about, Ole Miss offense for Georgia defense. Probably the winning matchup is Georgia's offense against Ole Miss's defense. And this is the time. This is the time for this talented defense to stand up, and they've got a chance to win the game. We've got Beck struggling. The running game for Georgia's coming on. They're finding ways to get the ball to different people, but I think this is their time to shine.
Let's talk about Ole Miss and the pressure that Lane Kiffin's under. He has a really nice contract. He has an NIL budget that is top of the SEC. He's got a world-class defensive front. As Landrum mentioned, I think they lead the nation in sacks with 42, so a tremendous unit. And this Georgia team has looked vulnerable at times. Just talk about how if Lane doesn't get them this year, when's it going to happen?
Yeah, and I think this is when you start going, okay, where is your mindset as a coach? What's the thing that's in your head? Kind of with Kirby with Alabama, is this something where you got a little bit of a mental thing going?
Right.
But he should have the great crowd. Rain, as long as it's not torrential, will not be a huge factor. Now, torrential rain changes everything. I don't care what they say. But as long as it's just normal rain, those guys usually be able to handle that because they've got such good conditions. The grass is – you've got this prescription turf and the water flows through it like it should. So I think it's a huge game for him. Dart is really on fire right now. He's got almost 900 yards and 7 touchdowns in the last 2 games. So this is a game for Kiffin. I mean, this is the game he really needs.
Put you on the spot here, but if Ole Miss knocks off Georgia, do you have them in your college football playoff rankings?
Whoa, that's a good question. I think I'd have to see some other people around them, but I think they'd have that opportunity. Yeah.
And you agree that if Ole Miss loses, they're done?
Yes.
I mean, from a college football player.
100%.
Okay.
Or as a program?
No, Landrum,
that NIL is
stop.
going to dry up there, Colonel Pat.
Stop, no. Donahue Chevrolet, that Chevy Tahoe. You're very proud of that vehicle.
Yeah, that Tahoe. Once again, I get a lot of questions about it. I'm always bragging on it. Got it from our guys at Donahue. Never pay a dealer fee. I think this is one of the cool things I know about these guys. They want to take care of the people that give back to us. So discounts for educators, college students, military, first responders, radio show hosts. I don't think you guys get any. Producers, Molly, I think you do. Podcast hosts, maybe these 2 guys. I don't know. Maybe they know somebody there. But check the guys out at Donahue Chevrolet.
Radiance Technology Defense of the Week. Let's go back to the plains of Auburn. Landrum brought it up earlier, Coach, but DJ Durkin, first-year defensive coordinator for Auburn, playing a lot of young guys. But, man, that unit, that has not been the issue down on the plains.
No.
Talk about what you've seen with this defense.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with them throughout the year. I think let's go back and look at that game. I think, just stopping the run game with Pavia, they did a great job. They held him to 26 yards. I think they had 84 total yards rushing. Pass defense was very good. I think they were Vandy was 4 for 16. So playing well. They had a mistake at the end of the game, which was really the defense had the young guy. Falk jumped up on the PAT or on the field goal, not the PAT, but on the field goal and landed on somebody, which would have really held them to 13, which would have been 2 field goals and a touchdown. I thought they did a really good job, and I think they've been consistent throughout the year.
Do you feel like Auburn, Coach? You just highlighted the defense and what Durkin's done. Do you think the offense is playing complementary football and doing their best with the defense and slowing down? We saw it on Saturday against Pavia, limiting them to under 250 yards. But it seems like to me, just watching the games, at times that the offense, there's a disconnect.
I would 100% said that early with all the turnovers, and that's what you cannot do is turn the ball over. It's like what is the identity? I know we're talking about the defense. What is the identity of the offense? And it's kind of like, we're a quarterback-centric team. Quarterback's been solid. I think he was 24 for 30 last week. No turnovers, but he's not making the explosive plays. Of course, we got young receivers. I think they don't have an identity truly on offense. And it should be centered around this running back, but it's not. But the defense is playing good enough to win the game. They're very multiple. Not a lot of huge standouts, but they're playing very solid team defense. I like watching him on the sidelines. Very animated, gets after it. So, I think they're playing definitely good enough defense to win games.
Is there something not too technical or in the weeds that when you watch Auburn's defense or what DJ Durkin has done in his career or kind of, I guess, his signature in regards to his scheme, is he doing that at Auburn, and what is it in layman's terms?
Yeah, in layman's terms, multiplicity. And I've talked a lot to folks, and I would have an offense coordinator say, this week I prepared for this and you came out in that. The next week, something else. So you've got to be able to have that built in your plan that you're not just grabbing at straws. And that's what happens to sometimes when people want to change, but it's not part of who they are. So there's so much work that goes into being multiple. Where we're a 3-4 team or a 4-down team, how do we pull that jack? So let's just talk a little bit of terminology here. So the outside linebacker in the 3-4 to the boundary is called the jack. You could call him anything you want, but that's the guy. That's usually what his name is. This has become the hybrid player. If you'll notice, this is the guy that will drop. They'll rush him from the boundary sometimes. Sometimes they'll put his hand down. The more multiple that guy is, the more he can do. And somebody will say, well, what did you do? Based on who the jack was. If you look at our last years at UAB, we had some really big-time pass rushers. We tied that guy into the front more. We had 2 of those guys playing in the NFL. Really 3 because one of them ended up with the Vikings, So we had those guys that we really want to make sure they could rush the passer. The more linebacker-ish that guy is, you pull him into the box, and now you're in those 3-3 looks. So true multiplicity, being able to change it up, being able to give them different looks. We talked about Bear defense out of Andy. True multiplicity, I see that out of them, giving them different formations, different coverages. He was always known as a blitz guy. I don't see that as much out of him right now, but I think they're very multiple. Once again, I still go back to getting off blocks, playing hard, and tackling, and I see them doing that.
And part of that, the reluctance to maybe blitz as much as he has in the past. I would think maybe the secondary, and you're thin there. You've already had a dismissal. You've had some key injuries at that spot. But still, all in all, you've Band-Aided it together, and you're still getting results out of that group.
Yeah, and I came back. I don't, who do you say is a dominant player on that defense? I don't. It's hard to say. They're young. So they are missing maybe some of those signature guys. Think of those guys Texas A&M's playing with, and we talked about the Ole Miss. I don't see as many of those type guys, which once again probably says that they're even doing a better job maybe with a little lesser younger guys, but they do have them playing together and playing hard.
Radiance Technologies coach, they bring us the defense of the week.
Yeah, our guys at Radiance, obviously sponsors of my favorite bowl, or one of my favorite bowls, the Shreveport Bowl, the Radiance Technology. But those guys, obviously we're all waving our American flags today after a good vote last night, and happy for that, and proud of what these guys do in defense of our country. They're in technology of drones and laser defense and all those things. So really appreciate our guys at Radiance.
Dr. Pepper brings us this program each and every week. Jimmy Lee and those guys, they just do a tremendous job. Before we talk about Jimmy, I did want to ask you one other question in regards to a team that's coming off a highly emotional game, and I'm talking about South Carolina. They're on the road at Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt has proven that you better be prepared when you play them. Talk about that and how difficult it's going to be for Shane Beamer after that emotional win. It went through until Monday when obviously things go viral with his videos and the talk of the shrubs being torn up at the stadium, all that kind of stuff. And now you got to get ready for a team that in the past you could take for granted, but you can't now.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. 100%. This is the world we're talking about. You're very high. You've got this great home win. You're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now here you go to Vanderbilt. They grind it out. The tough quarterback. You got to play the run game. And look at the formations. If you really want to go study Vanderbilt, unbalanced, tackle over, quarterback run, quick throw game, and then a tough defense that's going to make you grind it out. This is a recipe for an upset or a loss right after. In Vanderbilt's world, they're not thinking upset. They're just thinking, hey, look at who we beat. We're at home. We're in the thick of things. We should get a great bowl. They're coming to win this game, so it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, right now for Vanderbilt, you're playing for a better bowl.
Correct.
And if you're South Carolina, if you can somehow muster out a win, and you've been successful of late in this series, in this matchup, all of a sudden, you look at the rest of their games. They got Clemson in the rivalry game. You got Wofford that's thrown in there too. And I'm trying to remember who that other team is. They're all 4 winnable games.
Yeah.
You look at the schedule. All of a sudden, at the end of the season, are you kidding, Coach? Shane Beamer in South Carolina ends up 9-3.
Yes, that's one of these games, kind of like Alabama, LSU. 2 teams coming off big wins, and the collision. Who's going to win it? Because it's going to be important to both of them.
All right, Jimmy Lee and the fine folks there at Dr. Pepper, they present this program each and every week, Coach.
Yeah, I appreciate those guys. What they, Jimmy Lee and Buffalo Rock, what they do for our community. We talked about Dr. Pepper, just their involvement in college football. Appreciate them and allowing us to have our show every week.
It's been another great episode. Don't forget, you can always download it. You can listen to it on wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch it on YouTube. Search Jocks945 TV.
And I would encourage anybody who wants to maybe teach kids how to play football or teach coaches how to coach football, go and download a copy of that Radiance Technologies Independence Bowl in the win over BYU.
I think I'll do that this weekend.
It's great. It's great.
Thank you, guys.
For Molly Robinson, Landon Roberts, I'm Pat Smith, and Coach Bill Clark, have a great week.
This has been the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr.